radical left groups found that when it came to organizing, they were often relegated to support roles, that women didn't have the same kinds of leadership, that the male leaders of the leftist movements who were advocating for liberation weren't even conscious of the ways that they would sort of step on their sisters in arms and not give them any kind of agency within the movement. The Black feminist movement arose out of, gained a lot of power, I think, out of the double oppression of sometimes facing these kinds of issues in the Black liberation movement, although I think those issues were, the Black liberation movement did a better job of integrating Black feminist advocates, and feeling oppressed and frustrated with what was happening in white feminism. So there was a lot of important publications coming out during this time by writers like Alice Walker, Audre Lorde, Angela Davis, later Bell Hooks, and Kimberly Crenshaw, are going to lay the groundwork for intersectional theory, ways of thinking about oppression not just as impacting one aspect of one's identity, but being deeply, deeply tied to the ways in which our gender, our race, our economic stature sort of come together. So thinking about how a kind of a shared liberation praxis can address those intersectional identities. And this is really kind of a critical moment to think about this. It seems to me, at least just through my observations, that feminism is undergoing a transformation at this time period. And as much as a lot of these conflicts I've been talking about have been very painful, I'd like to think that out of those conflicts and out of that struggle, a lot of feminist movements have developed sort of praxes for moving forward that can avoid or at least try to work around some of the mistakes of the past. And this was a really, I don't know if people can read the text here, this was a controversial sign that appeared at the recent Women's March in Washington. I'll see all you nice white ladies at the next Black Lives Matter march, right? Sort of calling out whether, and the Women's March in Washington and the sister marches around the country are possibly the largest mass demonstration in the history of the United States. So there's this incredible amount of energy here, and this big question about whether that energy can be harnessed in a truly intersectional way to address all the kinds of oppression that we're facing at this moment. So I wanted to offer some suggestions about what kinds of praxis may have evolved out of these struggles. And I think a lot of the organizing that I see, even when it's not, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what praxis is?
Sure. So by practice, I literally just mean practice. What kind of methodology? How do you go about doing your organizing? How do you go about practicing being a feminist? So not just maybe standing for equal pay, but how do you decide to meet and organize? How do you band together with others to work toward these goals? And I think this is a way maybe too of shifting the idea from thinking about who women are or how we define these categories, but thinking about feminism as a practice that can address people whose intersecting identities cross different categories, and thinking about the traditions through which women have organized that offer us possible methods or lessons for addressing different kinds of problems. So maybe it'll make more sense with some of these examples, but I'm seeing even in some of the organizing that doesn't specifically address what we might call traditional women's issues, a mode of organizing and a mode of thinking that seems to me that arose out of feminist organizing from the past. So I'm thinking about things like working via collectives in anti-hierarchical ways, consciousness raising sessions and speak outs, experiments in communal living, recognizing the ways that capitalism impacts the personal, very personal ways in which we live, community-based healthcare and community-based organizing in general, media collectives, a long, long history of feminist media collectives picking up cameras to document their own lives, to tell the personal stories of individuals, and seeing that as reflective of and educational tools for the outside. There was just a poll that NPR reported on recently where Perry Undum, a polling agency, asked the American public who were the most famous feminists they could think of. And for the first time in history, 3 out of the top 4 were women of color. Michelle Obama tops the list, then Oprah, then Hillary, and then Beyonce. So I think this is a great kind of this is a great moment to think about how feminism is being redefined. And I'd add too that a lot of the key organizers, certainly behind the Women's March, the very diverse group of women behind the Women's March, but also behind groups like Black Lives Matter, have had a very clear and explicit link to the feminist movement and links to the queer and trans community too. So this is, I think, really, really hopeful. So just a couple of examples to throw out there. This is a group, Assata's Daughters, based in Chicago, who've named themselves after the exiled Black Panther activist Assata Shakur. And this is a demonstration that they did where they, many of them got arrested. They blocked a major roadway in Chicago. And it's a really complicated protest. So it was the week of the NFL draft town. So there was all this media attention to the NFL coming in to do a draft. A lot of money, a large block of money had been granted for police protection for the draft town. And this was right after a police officer, Dante Servin, had been found not guilty in the 2012 shooting of an unarmed African-American woman, Rekia Boyd. This was also at the same time that there were, the Chicago State University had its budget significantly cut. And this is a college that, a public college that served predominantly community of color. And Assata's Daughters saw all of these things, which might not have been linked together, as absolutely linked together economically. So this is part of their statement. Our continued resistance serves as the penalty for destroying Black lives. There will be no uninterrupted NFL draft town when Black women die without justice. And they called out Mayor Emanuel for cutting this $300,000 deal for an event worth $3.2 million at the same time that we cannot afford to fund Black education. So, an explicitly feminist, and they're, the video that they released of this action, they're playing Beyonce's Formation. They drink lemonade. They're styling themselves after her dancers. So there's playful and fantastic integrating of Beyonce's explicitly Black feminist message within an action that links together a critique of oppressive policing, a call for funding of public education, and pointing a finger at the City Council for giving a corporate giveaway at a moment when their community is hurting. So I thought this was just a brilliant example of tying these threads together. I think we could look at things like environmental activism at this time and the ways in which community organizers in Flint, Michigan, who've been suffering the poisoning of their water and incredibly high lead levels, particularly in their children, with the Standing Rock pipeline and the oppression of Native organizers there, seeing direct solidarity. The Fight for 15, which is organizing around a $15 minimum wage in order to help working class people be able to afford to function, and specifically calling out in their activism the high percentage of women who are working in these poverty-ridden jobs. And the way that Black Lives Matter has also explicitly linked itself to the trans right movement, looking at the high incarceration of trans people, the abuse of trans people in prison, the refusal to give them the hormones that they need, jailing them in the wrong gendered facilities, but seeing this racial justice issue and this trans justice issue are explicitly linked. One last example, which is much more on a micro level, another aspect of the feminist movement that's important to pay attention to is this issue of sort of microaggressions and the micro ways in which oppression can sometimes work. And I'm sure anyone here who's ever been in a faculty meeting or any kind of work meeting or just in classroom, and this is an issue I think professors and students could actually have a really interesting discussion about. What do you do when your students are getting talked over? Do your professors know? I'm sure I'm guilty of this all the time too. Like how do we pay attention to these issues of communication that happen on a very personal level? And sometimes it's harder to organize around these things or figure out how to advocate for these issues. But this was an example that was published that women within the Obama administration, again, this is like the good, supposedly the good guys, found that even though there was a higher percentage of women represented within this administration,